Chapter 7: Scientist and Militiaman. As a young man, Franklin had displayed a persistent interest in science, or natural philosophy as it was called in those days. As his business continued to prosper during the late 1730s, he devoted more and more time to various scientific pursuits. As early as 1737, he was writing in the Pennsylvania Gazette about the causes of earthquakes and to friends about the behavior of storms on the Atlantic coast. Also interested in botany, he introduced the yellow willow to America about this time. By 1739 or 1740, he had invented the Pennsylvania fireplace, known today as the Franklin stove, a freestanding cast iron unit which could efficiently heat an entire room with much less firewood than was commonly used. As the popularity of these stoves increased among the people, the colonial governor offered to give the inventor a patent for the sole vending of them for a term of years. But I declined it from a principle which has ever weighed with me on such occasions, that as we enjoy great advantages from the inventions of others, we should be glad of an opportunity to serve others by any invention of ours, and this we should do freely and generously. The use of these fireplaces in very many houses, both of this and the neighboring colonies, has been and is a great savings of wood to the inhabitants. By 1743, Franklin had begun corresponding with other ingenious men throughout the colonies, and in May of that year he sent to these correspondents a circular letter proposing the formation of a society to promote the dissemination of useful knowledge in America. The first drudgery of settling new colonies, which confines the attention of people to mere necessities, is now pretty well over, and there are many in every province and circumstances that set them at ease and afford leisure to cultivate the finer arts and improve the common stock of knowledge. To such of these, who are men of speculation, many hints must from time to time arise. Many observations occur, which, if well examined, pursued, and improved, might produce discoveries to the advantage of some or all of the British plantations, or to the benefit of mankind in general. He proposed that the organization be called the American Philosophical Society, and that Philadelphia, being the city nearest the center of the continent colonies, and having the advantage of a good growing library, be the center of the society. The members, meeting and corresponding regularly, would consider improvements and discoveries in many fields of study: agriculture, mineralogy, mathematics, chemistry, new mechanical inventions for saving labor, all new arts, trades, and manufactures, geography, animal husbandry, and all philosophical experiments that let light into the nature of things, tend to increase the power of man over matter and multiply the conveniences or pleasures of life. Within a year, the American Philosophical Society had been organized and had held several meetings. Thomas Hopkinson, a Philadelphia attorney and a member of the junto, was the society's first president. Franklin served as secretary, as he had offered to do in the initial proposal, until he was elected president in 1769. Franklin's commitment to furthering scientific knowledge continued to increase. In 1745, he wrote to a fellow member of the American Philosophical Society, "I shall be very willing and ready, when you think proper to publish your piece on gravitation, to print it at my own expense and risk. If I can be the means of communicating anything valuable to the world, I do not always think of gaining, nor even of saving, by my business, but a piece of that kind, as it must excite the curiosity of all the learned, can hardly fail of bearing its own expense." The events of the next several months would focus Franklin's attention on a field in which he would shortly rise to international preeminence. As early as 1743, during a trip to Boston, he had witnessed a series of experiments in static electricity, conducted by a Dr. Archibald Spencer. They were imperfectly performed, Franklin later noted, as he was not very expert, but being on a subject quite new to me, they equally surprised and pleased me. He apparently engaged in no experimentation himself, however, until the year 1746, when the Library Company of Philadelphia received an unusual gift from a London botanist named Peter Collinson. It was a glass tube designed for electrical experiments similar to those Franklin had seen 3 years earlier. "I eagerly seized the opportunity of repeating what I had seen at Boston," he wrote, "and by much practice acquired great readiness in performing those also which we had an account of from England, adding a number of new ones." By March 1747, he was spending much of his time in these investigations. As he wrote Collinson, "I never was before engaged in any study that so totally engrossed my attention and my time as this has lately done. For what with making experiments when I can be alone, and repeating them to my friends and acquaintance who, from the novelty of the thing, come continuously in crowds to see them, I have during some months past had little leisure for anything else." With the discovery of the Leyden jar in Holland that year, Franklin's electrical experiments progressed more rapidly. He initiated the use of the terms positive and negative, discovered some principles of conductivity, and began to form several tentative hypotheses. Then, in the fall of 1747, his scientific studies were interrupted by urgent events which threatened the peace and safety of the American colonists. In July 1747, Spain and France, both nations had been at war with England for several years, sent privateers up the Delaware River near Philadelphia, where they attacked and plundered 2 farms and captured an American ship. Franklin immediately became concerned for the safety of the province, but he knew it would be difficult to unite Pennsylvania's diverse religious and economic groups in any kind of military defense effort, especially in view of the Quakers' teachings that war was unlawful. Sitting as a clerk in the House of Representatives, he had often witnessed the futility of the governor's attempts to secure legislation providing for a colonial militia, so Franklin decided on approach of his own. I determined to try what might be done by a voluntary association of the people. To promote this, I first wrote and published a pamphlet entitled Plain Truth, in which I stated our defenseless situation in strong lights with the necessity of union and discipline for our defense, and promised to propose in a few days an association to be generally signed for that purpose. The pamphlet had a sudden and surprising effect. I was called upon for the instrument of association, and having settled the draft of it with a few friends, I appointed a meeting of the citizens in a large building. The house was pretty full. I had prepared a number of printed copies and provided pens and ink dispersed all over the room. I harangued them little on the subject, read the paper and explained it, and then distributed the copies, which were eagerly signed, not the least objection being made. When the company separated and the papers were collected, we found above 1,200 hands and other copies being dispersed in the country. The subscribers amounted at length to upwards of 10,000. These all furnished themselves as soon as they could with arms, formed themselves into companies and regiments, chose their officers, and met every week to be instructed in the manual, exercise, and other parts of military discipline. He then organized a lottery to raise funds for building a fort below the city and furnishing it with cannons. Some of these had to be purchased from England, so Franklin and 3 others journeyed to New York to borrow cannons from Governor George Clinton while they waited for their order to arrive. He at first refused us peremptorily, but at dinner with his council, where there was great drinking of Madeira wine, as the custom of that place there then was, he softened by degrees and said he would lend us 6. After a few more bumpers, he advanced to 10, and at length he very good-naturedly conceded 18. Governor Clinton seemed to be affected by the Madeira much as Franklin had been by George Whitefield's preaching in 1739. It was also Franklin who proposed in January 1748 the first fast day in Pennsylvania. In connection with this proposal, he drew up a proclamation declaring that it is the duty of mankind on all suitable occasions to acknowledge their dependence on the divine being, and expressing a prayer that he would take this province under his protection, confound the designs and defeat the attempts of its enemies, and unite our hearts and strengthen our hands in every undertaking that may be for the public good and for our defense and security in this time of danger. Franklin's popularity was greatly enhanced by his effectiveness in organizing a defensive military force in Pennsylvania. He later recalled that the officers of the companies composing the Philadelphia regiment, being met, chose me for their colonel, but conceiving myself unfit, I declined that station and recommended Mr. Thomas Lawrence, a fine person and man of influence, who was accordingly appointed. Franklin often appeared at the newly erected fort, where the associators kept a nightly guard while the war lasted, and among the rest I regularly took my turn of duty there as a common soldier. He felt a great sense of relief when peace was concluded later that year, but his military experience would prove useful later on. And that's the end of chapter 7. And if you are enjoying my channel, please subscribe. Thank you.